Profound and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate beings, please generate bodhicitta before teaching.
Next, we will discuss the Shurangama Sutra. Previously, in the Shurangama Sutra, Ananda said that for him, he also had great merit and good fortune. He became the foremost in hearing and extensive learning, and he also took on the identity of a monastic. However, it seems that within his own mind stream, whether it be realization or afflictions, these states were like malaria that strikes every other day, sometimes present, sometimes not. Therefore, he asked the Buddha to compassionately give us teachings on what exactly the knot of our body and mind is, what is the root, the very foundation of this knot. Because of this, sentient beings have constantly relied on it to wander in the cycle of the three realms of existence. So when he raised this question at that time, he himself was deeply moved and full of feeling. Actually, as I mentioned the other day, for us humans, sometimes having this kind of emotional sensitivity towards the Dharma is also very important. Some people, indeed, whether they are listening to the Dharma or in the process of seeking the Dharma, feel a deep sense of remorse, and their faces are covered in tears. Some feel overwhelmingly joyful. Upon encountering such Dharma, they become so happy that they cannot control their emotions. In that case, the blessings of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas can very easily merge into your mind. Otherwise, you are like a stone in water, no matter how many teachings you have heard. If there is no change in your mind stream at all, then in this way listening to the Dharma actually has little effect. Therefore, sometimes we observe that perhaps newcomers or people who have just encountered the Dharma are especially enthusiastic, moved, and tearful. There are cases like this. Then, after a long time has passed, some of us might gradually, slowly lose that initial enthusiasm. If that happens, it is quite a pity. As for Venerable Ananda, it seems that from the beginning until now, he has always been a rather emotional person. Some of our Dharma friends are like this too, with just a little remark, or even before anything is said, their tears start pouring down, just profusely streaming down, like the rain we've had these past few days, crying continuously. Actually, crying is also a good thing. It shows that they have feelings. For example, whether others criticize you or praise you, when they praise you, you cry out of joy, or when they scold you, you also cry. Among some of our coordinators, if I just say a little bit, they start crying, so later on I didn't even dare to speak up. If I do, I think I shouldn't say it, otherwise if I say it they will definitely cry. But crying is also perhaps an expression of taking things very seriously. Actually, a person who can cry shows that they are relatively, at the very least, free from arrogance in their mind stream. You see, Venerable Ananda is also like this. He has already cried for the 6th time, asking the Buddha for teachings. So before our entire study of the Shurangama Sutra concludes, who knows how many times he will have cried. Then at this time, then the world-honored one took pity on Ananda and on all the others in the assembly who still needed instruction, wishing that for the sake of the future they might transcend the conditioned world and become guides for the time yet to come. As he circled his hand over the crown of Ananda's head, his hand shone with light that was the color of the purple-tinted gold of the river Jambu. Then, throughout all 10 directions, every world in which Buddhas were dwelling quaked in 6 ways. Here it says, at this moment, when the world-honored one saw Ananda crying, actually the Buddha was someone who cared deeply for his own relatives and family. The Shakya clan was generally like this. Seeing Ananda cry again, the world-honored one felt great pity for him. As well as for those present in the assembly at the time, In this great Shurangama assembly, there were still many learners, those practitioners on the path of causality, who had not yet attained the fruition, and for the future what else? So that future sentient beings like us may also attain the transcendent fruition, creating such karmic causes and conditions. Furthermore, when the Buddha expounded the sutras and taught the Dharma, these teachings would become the wisdom eye for the world in the future. Because for us, this worldly eye, actually the true Dharma, is the eye of the world, and spiritual guides are also the eye of the world. But here, it primarily means to consider that these words of the Buddha would eventually become the eye of the world. You see, more than 2,500 years after the Buddha's parinirvana, when we look at this sutra now, we understand how this world is. It is equivalent to being bestowed with eyes. We will all have this kind of creating the eye of the world for sentient beings in the future. So with this purpose in mind, the Buddha's remarkably magnificent hand, this hand is compared to the purple-tinted gold light of Jambudvipa, a hand radiating purple golden light. Sometimes the Buddha's hand is described as a golden light hand. Generally, it might carry a slight purplish hue. The color of the Buddha's flesh might have been like this. As for the pure gold of Jambudvipa, it is the finest gold among all gold. This golden-like hand of the Buddha gently touched the crown of Ananda's head. While he rubbed the crown of Ananda's head, actually the Buddha was still very kind to him. He was reprimanding him on one hand, but stroking his head on the other. At this moment, throughout all 10 directions, east, south, west, north, the 4 intermediate directions, above and below, all the worlds of the Buddhas and thus come ones in the 10 directions experience 6 kinds of quaking. As for these 6 kinds of quaking, as we have explained before when teaching Buddhist sutras, they are moving, rising, surging, roaring, trembling, and striking. This is not entirely a type of shaking like the earthquakes we experience. It is not like that. The quaking at that time was a kind of quaking that only bodhisattvas dwelling on the grounds could perceive. Why were there 6 kinds of quaking? Because the Dharma wheel we are about to turn primarily concerns the purification of our 6 faculties and 6 sense objects into wisdom, achieving their purity. Therefore 6 kinds of quaking appeared here. Furthermore, when Ananda and the others received this teaching, and the blessings of the Buddha, because our physical world and sentient beings are essentially a union of heaven and humanity, there is an inseparable relationship between the environment and sentient beings, a kind of connection and dependent origination. For these reasons these auspicious signs appeared. Then it says, each one of the numberless thus come ones of those worlds emitted resplendent light from the crown of his head. Those beams of light shone down upon the crown of the thus come one's head, as he was seated in Prince Jeta's grove. No one in the assembly had witnessed such an event before. What happens next here? Next, thus come ones as numerous as specks of dust, as numerous as specks of dust in the 10 directions, exceptionally many thus come ones dwelling in their own, meaning dwelling in their own worlds. These innumerable thus come ones, each of them, this resplendent light from their crowns, the crown light of each Buddha, meaning precious light, began to radiate from the crown of each thus come one's head. After radiating, this light simultaneously shone upon what? Upon India, in our Jambudvipa of the Saha world, at the Jeta Grove where Shakyamuni Buddha was, upon the crown of the thus come one's head. This is very rare. Light emitted from the crowns of thus come ones in all 10 directions, and moreover, this light did not enter the thus come one's throat or heart center, it completely entered the crown of Shakyamuni Buddha's head. Intrinsically, this sutra of ours is called the Great Buddha's Crown Shurangama Sutra, Great Buddha's Crown. Therefore, among Buddhist sutras, it is at the very pinnacle, such a supreme sutra. Furthermore, as for the thus come one, he actually also received the blessings of the thus come ones of the 10 directions. What does this mean here? All Buddhas share the same realization. That is to say, all Buddhas are actually the states of realization they have attained are in fact nothing outside of the states discussed in our great Shurangama Samadhi. This meaning is also very important. Some of us might think that the realization of Shakyamuni Buddha is of one kind, the realization of Amitabha Buddha is of another kind, and the realization of Akshobhya Buddha might be yet another. We might think this way, but actually that is not the case. As long as they have attained realization, these thus come ones, the states they have attained are all equal. Therefore we often say that the Buddhas and thus come ones, within the ultimate meaning of the Dharma Dhatu of wisdom, are of one taste and one entity. This is also what it means, at that time when light emitted from the crowns of all the thus come ones in the 10 directions and merged into our original teacher Shakyamuni Buddha. Such a profoundly rare phenomenon had never been seen or heard of before by the entire assembly present, nor had it been seen in the past. Perhaps for many of us, such a principle is also very difficult to observe. This is the reason. So at this time then Ananda and all the others in the great assembly heard the numberless thus come ones from throughout the 10 direction speak in one voice, though with different tongues, saying, "Well done, Ananda. You want to understand the ignorance that you were born with, the source of the knot. What causes you to be bound to the cycle of death and rebirth is your 6 faculties of perception, nothing more." At this moment Ananda and the assembly present, everyone collectively heard the thus come ones of the 10 directions just now, these thus come ones as numerous as specks of dust, collectively and unanimously telling Venerable Ananda, actually Ananda is quite remarkable. So many thus come ones spoke to Venerable Ananda at the exact same time. What did they tell him? "Well done, Ananda. This is exceedingly rare. Well done, Ananda. If you wish to understand the innate ignorance," this was also Ananda's previous question, right? Primarily, he did not know what this knot was like, what the knot of sentient beings, the root, was like, so the thus come ones of the 10 directions were explaining it to him. Actually, this is also a deeply profound part of the Shurangama Sutra. They said, if you wish to understand the innate ignorance, innate means what every single sentient being has been accompanied by ever since birth, that kind of ignorance. If you wish to understand such ignorance, which is the knot of birth and death in samsara, what keeps you wandering in the cycle of birth and death, this true knot, the root of such a knot is exclusively your 6 faculties. There is nothing outside of this. Here it says, what is the cause of samsara? The cause of samsara is the knot. And what is the knot? It is your 6 faculties. There is nothing apart from the 6 faculties. Therefore, when we taught the 12 links of dependent origination before, the root of samsara is ignorance or self-grasping, the satkaya dristi. But here in the Shurangama Sutra, it says that the most fundamental ignorance of your cycle of birth and death is simply our 6 faculties, nothing more. There is nothing else besides the 6 faculties. Actually, whether we say the cause of our samsara is ignorance, or the cause is the 6 faculties, the meaning of these two should be the same. Also, since you wish to understand the supreme enlightenment, you should understand that it is through those same 6 faculties that you can quickly gain bliss, liberation, and stillness, wondrous and everlasting. It is your 6 faculties, nothing else. Ananda was surely even more dizzy. Then they said, wandering in samsara is also due to the 6 faculties. There is nothing else apart from the 6 faculties. And if you wish to understand how to attain supreme enlightenment, in a very short time, and quickly attain the bliss of liberation, as well as the stillness that is wondrous, everlasting, and unchanging actually, its root is also nothing other than the 6 faculties. You see, Ananda surely could not understand again now. It was explained even more deeply. Earlier it said what ignorance is and what the root is, and now it says the root of samsara is simply your 6 faculties, such as eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body. The root of nirvana, meaning the root of liberation, is also the 6 faculties of eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. There is nothing outside of this. So when the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions all speak to Ananda in this way, practically this is extremely important. Some, such as Master Hanshan, say that this is a great dependent origination in the Buddha's turning of the Dharma wheel. Why? Because if such vows were made during the causal stages, upon reaching the fruition stage, there will also be this principle that all Buddhas share the same path. Therefore, this is a great dependent origination, because ordinarily there is one Buddha giving him the teachings, but here, speaking to Ananda, the Buddhas of the 10 directions are all teaching him. So on the surface it seems they are speaking to Ananda, but in reality this is also spoken to us, we people of later generations, although we cannot see the Buddhas of the 10 directions now, nor can we see our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Such teachings, blessed by them, can be received by Ananda as well as by us in the future. We can all attain them. Thus, in some Buddhist sutras, for example, in the Avatamsaka Sutra, shared realization of the 10 directions, it is said that the thus come ones of the 10 directions share the same realization. The Lotus Sutra speaks of all Buddhas simultaneously manifesting, all Buddhas giving teachings at the exact same time. Also in the Amitabha Sutra there is exhortation to faith from the 6 directions, the Buddhas of the 6 directions exhorting and encouraging you to generate faith, and so on. In different Buddhist sutras, different thus come ones, including when we study the Earth Store Sutra or study other sutras, including the Vimalakirti Sutra, there is often the wisdom and light of the thus come ones of the 10 directions, and also the blessings of the thus come ones of the 10 directions. Even the thus come ones of the 10 directions coming to the place of the layman Vimalakirti. There are so many unimaginable things that for us ordinary people, let alone witnessing them personally, are very difficult to even imagine. Such phenomena do exist. Of course, regarding the inconceivable states of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, it is perfectly normal that they are difficult to imagine. I think many principles in our world today, for us who are not professionals, are also very difficult to imagine, including our modern astronomy, or the exploration of the oceans, the exploration of the earth, the exploration of outer space, and so on. Many such matters for us ordinary people in the world are also unimaginable. So, if we feel that because it is hard to imagine, we refuse to acknowledge it, that is unreasonable. Because our wisdom is after all limited, this has already been explained. Why is this passage so important? This passage is actually the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas simultaneously radiating light and then speaking to Ananda. Through these words, they intended for Ananda to understand 2 points. The first point is that all the profound intentions of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are identical. The second purpose was to cause Ananda to generate faith. If Shakyamuni Buddha alone had said this, he might have had a slight doubt. Is it because he is my older cousin? Could it be because of this or that? He might have had such thoughts, but with the thus come ones of the 10 directions telling him in unison, he had no choice but to believe. Therefore it was to cause Ananda to generate a more significant, even greater faith regarding this. That is why it was spoken this way. It is to let us understand that the root of nirvana is the 6 faculties, and the root of samsara is also the 6 faculties. So our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body and mind are indeed very important. It depends on how we use them. If we use them well, we can attain liberation. If we do not use them well, constantly following them and clinging to things, oh, this is white, this is red, this is blue, in this dazzlingly complex world, continuously generating various conceptual thoughts of solid grasping that will make us forever drown in the boundless ocean of suffering in samsara. Everyone understands this as well. Then, following that, though Ananda heard these words of Dharma, you see, as I just mentioned, I could already guess it. Even though Ananda heard these words of Dharma, all the voices of Dharma from the thus come ones of the 10 directions, he heard them all perfectly well. He did not understand them. He bowed his head and said respectfully to the Buddha, "How can it be that nothing more than the 6 faculties binds us to the cycle of death and rebirth, while at the same time they cause us to gain wondrous and everlasting bliss?" This time he didn't cry. He said, "Although I heard very clearly, you see, these words from the thus come ones of the 10 directions, Venerable Ananda, he heard the Dharma voices of the thus come ones of the 10 directions, but in his heart he truly did not understand. The reason he did not understand, as stated in some commentaries like those by Master Jiaoguang, is that usually within the Sravakayana the 18 dhatus are taught, but here only the 6 faculties were mentioned, so it seemed as though all the so-called phenomena were not fully encompassed within them. Furthermore, saying that the root of both samsara and nirvana is like this, from the perspective of a Sravakayana practitioner, this was also a case for him where he did not grasp the principle that samsara and nirvana are non-dual, so he continuously prostrated before the Buddha. Because he still didn't understand in his heart, due to not understanding, he then bowed his head and said respectfully to the Buddha. He kept making full prostrations at the Buddha's seat. After bowing he said this, "Why is it that the root which subjects me to the cycle of birth and death, and the great bliss and wondrous eternity of nirvana and liberation, the root of both of these is entirely the 6 faculties, and nothing else?" He still couldn't quite wrap his mind around it, because the root of samsara is the 6 faculties, and the root of achieving nirvana and liberation is also the 6 faculties. If that is the case, what exactly are the 6 faculties? So he asked this question. Ananda continuously questioned the Buddha. He was a bit confused by this issue. Confused by the principle of the non-duality of samsara and nirvana. At this point, the Buddha began to explain to him why the root of samsara is the 6 faculties, and the root of nirvana is also the 6 faculties. Actually, the principles taught in here, in some of our tantric teachings like the 7 treasuries and the 9 tikyabji, are mentioned a lot in those texts. The phrasing may be different, but the content should be very similar. Therefore I am saying this, if we are teaching the Shurangama Sutra first, it is excellent, if one is well versed in the 5 great treatises, because it involves sometimes logical reasoning, sometimes the Abhidhammakosha, sometimes Madhyamaka's emptiness, and sometimes certain states of prajna will also be discussed. Of course Vinaya might not be discussed a lot, but there will still be a bit of it. More importantly, perhaps, the mantrayana, especially this kind of Dokchen great perfection. If one has comprehension of the related tantras and pith instructions, then the Shurangama Sutra can be, perhaps, taught better and studied better. Next, the Buddha tells Ananda why the root of both samsara and nirvana is the 6 faculties. What is the reason? Next he explains it to Ananda in this manner. The faculties and their objects come from the same source. What binds and what unbinds are one and the same. The consciousness are by nature illusory, like flowers seen in the sky. This is also very important. Why is it stated this way? The 6 faculties and the 6 sense objects actually originate from the exact same source. The 6 sense objects, what we call the external 6 sense objects, and the 6 faculties are internal 6 faculties of eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind. In reality, both of these are in the ultimate truth, both are unestablished. In the conventional truth, they both arise due to causes and conditions, therefore neither of them possesses any true essential nature. And as for liberation and bondage, it is exactly the same. Conventionally, both are established. If investigated in terms of ultimate truth, both of these are also unestablished. If one studies the fundamental wisdom of the middle way, this point is very easy to understand. Or in omniscient Longchenpa's The Trilogy of Natural Freedom, within our Dogen teachings there is the Trilogy of Natural Freedom. Once this is explained in there, it is also very easy to grasp. Liberation is bondage and bondage is liberation. Actually, faculties and sense objects share the same source, and bondage and liberation are non-dual. Also regarding the nature of consciousness, the nature of our consciousness is illusory, exactly like flowers in the sky. So within this text, Ananda's question has actually been addressed. because the faculties mean the six faculties, and the objects mean the six sense objects, the six domains, and the nature of consciousness later refers to the six consciousnesses. This totals the 18 dhatus. As for the 18 dhatus, in their fundamental essence, they are actually non-dual and undifferentiated. But in their manifestations, they are just like fresh flowers in the sky. It seems they exist when unexamined, but when truly examined, they do not exist either. The Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch also states, "True suchness is the substance of thought. Thought is the function of true suchness. Between true suchness and thought, there is a distinction between substance and function." So here, whether it involves our six consciousnesses, our six faculties, or our six sense objects in their manifestations, each one interacts and functions with the others. This is called the law of dependent origination, but their true nature is entirely unestablished. It is explained in this manner. The Buddha further told Ananda, "In response to objects, Ananda, there is perception, and in response to the faculties there are objects. Neither the objects nor perceptions of them have an essential nature. They are dependent on each other, like intertwining reeds." He states here, why is this so? He explains to Ananda, because our external sense objects also exist dependently. Through the sense objects, this for example, relying on external objects, the visual faculty and visual consciousness are generated. Then, relying on the faculty, there is this manifestation of the external six sense objects. We can put it this way: relying on the six sense objects, the perception of the six faculties is triggered. Then, once there is the perception of the six faculties, the manifestations of the external six sense objects appear. So the perceived object and the perceiving subject, the perceived part and the perceiving part, or the object and the perceiving mind, these two are actually established in dependence upon each other. Therefore, these two lack any essential nature whatsoever. This is similar to intertwining reeds. Regarding these intertwining reeds, it is said, of course different commentaries interpret it differently. Some say it is a type of grass like regular reeds. But generally speaking, we could say this: because this kind of reed grass, whether it's a bundle or as some say it's like a tripod, or some say it's two reeds, they are all tangled and twisted together, but in fact their root is the same, it's one single root. Moreover, they are hollow inside. Like Master Oe and many others explain it this way: it has no inherent nature. In this way, it is just like intertwining reeds. They appear as though they exist by mutually relying on each other. I rely on you and you rely on me. They are generated dependently in this manner, but in reality they are empty inside, and their root is not separated either. Therefore, for our faculties, objects and consciousnesses, on the surface, it seems they have the function of generating perceived objects, they have the function of generating perceiving subjects, and they have the function of generating other effects. But in truth, these are all non-dual and undifferentiated. This principle is also very profound. Actually, for us sentient beings, caught in grasping, we often speak of the perceiver and the perceived. Only when our dualistic grasping dissolves into the Dharma Dhatu will the so-called grasping at self and grasping at phenomena gradually and slowly diminish. So why do sentient beings wander in samsara? It is because of dualistic grasping. Dualistic grasping is the key issue. Here it states that the root of dualistic grasping is the faculties, objects, and sense fields. Everyone should know this, the faculties and the sense objects. Know therefore that the establishment of perceived objects, such that they exist separately within your awareness, is the foundation of ignorance. When objects are not perceived as separate from awareness, that itself is nirvana, which is the true purity, free of outflows. Why would you allow anything else to be added to it? Everyone should be clear about this passage. It is very famous in the Shurangama Sutra, and it is also a profoundly deep passage. When many high monks and great masters quote texts, they frequently quote this. There have also been high monks and great masters who, relying on this verse, attained realization. Therefore, this passage is exceptionally important. How is it explained? Its meaning is, therefore you should know now the establishment of perceived objects. As long as a view of a perceived object is established, if it is perceived as such, then this is the foundation of ignorance. If the perceived object does not exist separately from awareness, such a view is in fact nirvana. And if such a view is nirvana, it is free of outflows, and its true nature is also pure. Why would there be anything else within it? We have already explained to Ananda earlier that the root of nirvana is nothing other than the 6 faculties, and the root of samsara is also nothing other than the 6 faculties. But here it has already been explained why this is the case. Essentially, if you establish a perceived object within your awareness, in reality, whether it is an awareness that establishes existence or an awareness that establishes non-existence, such establishment of a perceived object is the foundation of ignorance. If you establish your perception as existing, this is the dharma of ordinary beings, and it means being bound in samsara. If you establish your perception as non-existing, as empty, a one-sided emptiness, then this is also the foundation of ignorance. This is the root of the path of the 2 vehicles. In fact, it cannot lead to ultimate liberation either. Then what is it? When objects are not perceived as separate from awareness, your awareness does not hold existence, nor non-existence, nor one-sided emptiness. All phenomena are utterly ungraspable. That is to say, it is free from all conceptual fabrications. In this way, a person who attains this can truly attain nirvana. It is free of outflows, it is the true nature, and it is pure. And within such a state, how could there possibly be other concepts of existence, non-existence, right, wrong, or any other phenomena? It is impossible to accommodate them. So for this passage I saw that some commentaries quoted a koan from the Compendium of 5 Lamps. At that time there was someone named Chan Master Yuan. Chan Master Yuan had tremendous faith in the Shurangama Sutra, and he began to read the Shurangama Sutra. When he read to this very passage, he attained enlightenment. But when he was enlightened, it seemed his reading of the text was slightly different from how we punctuate it today. How did he separate the punctuation? First he read, establishing perception, placing a comma here. If any perception is established, knowing is the root of ignorance, then this knowing is the root of ignorance. Knowing is the root of ignorance. This is the first sentence. Then the second sentence, if perception is non-existent, if perception does not exist, placing a comma here, then seeing this is nirvana. Seeing this, one has already attained nirvana. So when he read to this passage, it could be said he attained enlightenment. So later, when he himself spoke of his own realization, he said, "This is where I awakened. This is the place where I attained enlightenment." In this koan, of course there are several koans used in the Chan school that have slightly different phrasings. But in some that mention Chan Master Yuan, he was a very remarkable, great accomplished practitioner. It seems that later, after he passed away, he was placed in a coffin. 3 days later, some of his disciples were very heartbroken, so they went and opened the coffin again to pray to him. Then the Chan Master began to sit up. Then he returned and gave them teachings as well. After giving the teachings, he asked everyone, "Do not come and disturb me any more." Then he went back into the coffin and lay down. After that, the disciples didn't dare to disturb him again. Such a view is indeed extremely profound. Regarding this point, there is a passage in the Avatamsaka Sutra that is quite similar. Having views is a defilement. This is not true seeing. Being free from all views, in this way one truly sees the Buddha. If one has a view, whenever one holds a view, the having views mentioned here refers to whether one holds a view of true existence or a view of non-existence. These are all defilements. Therefore, such views are considered here as not true seeing. They are not right views, or rather they are the most inferior views. Then what is true seeing like? It is being free from all views, free from all concepts of existence, non-existence, right, just as taught in the 400 verses on the middle way. So such a view in reality is what it truly means to see the Buddha. Whoever possesses such a view holds the true right view. Therefore, in the true definitive teachings of Buddhism, whether it is phenomena with true existence or phenomena without true existence, neither existence nor non-existence dwells in the mind. This is the true view. Then moving on. Then the world-honored one, wishing to restate these principles, spoke these verses. Next, the Buddha begins to speak. The teachings given previously are repeated once more, proclaimed in the form of verses. Of course, within this, a portion is a restatement, and a portion is not a restatement. Some are taught directly in the form of verses. There are two types here. The type of verse that repeats the meaning is called a restating verse. In Buddhist sutras there are often verses that reiterate the preceding principles once more. Why is it done this way? I also explained this when we taught the Lotus Sutra previously. For some people, when it is in prose form, they cannot understand it. But later, when it is proclaimed in verse form, they will understand it. There are sentient beings like this. Therefore, verses are spoken for these sentient beings. Alternatively, the principles taught earlier are summarized through verses, proclaimed in a concluding manner. There is also this purpose, which is why they are proclaimed again. In our true nature, all conditioned things are seen as empty. That which arises from conditions is illusory. That which is unconditioned is not born, nor does it perish. It too has no reality like flowers in the sky. This verse is also very famous. The first two lines establish the emptiness of conditioned phenomena. The latter two lines establish the emptiness of unconditioned phenomena. But in the Tibetan text it seems they do not use the terms conditioned and unconditioned this way. They establish it using true nature and non-existent phenomena. It does not mention conditioned and unconditioned. The Tibetan text does not translate using these two terms. I don't know if they did this intentionally or if there is another reason. Here it says, regarding in our true nature all conditioned things, all conditioned phenomena, including the faculties, objects and consciousnesses we discussed earlier, they're kind of, actually for them, they should have both their appearance and their nature, these two, and their nature is entirely of conditioned phenomena. In their fundamental nature, not a single one is truly existent. They are all conditioned phenomena, and such conditioned phenomena arise from conditions. Because they arise from conditions, they are like illusions, like magical creations. As for unconditioned phenomena, they are actually, it is said that this passage is found in Master Bhavaveka's Karatala Ratna. Didn't I mention before, right at the beginning, that there was a scholar named Liu Cheng? He took some of the principles in the Shurangama Sutra and listed 100 questions. He probably suspected it was an apocryphal sutra. He raised some points in it. It seems this was also one of his reasons at the time. Why? Because this passage actually in Master Bhavaveka's Karatala Ratna, it was mentioned, so how could it be? If it is from a sutra, why would a shastra mention it? So these people sometimes truly have exceptionally heavy conceptual thoughts. If you look at many of the sutras, they are cited very frequently in the shastras. These later high monks and great masters often use certain phrases from the sutras, frequently quoting them in their treatises, often proclaiming them in the form of verses. Their reasoning is like this. Originally this is about conditioned phenomena, and these he seems to explain it using the three-mode logical reasoning. For example, the true nature is conditioned phenomena. Why? Because they arise from conditions like an illusion. Then unconditioned phenomena have no birth or cessation. Why? Because they are not real, like flowers in the sky, and so on. It is established in this manner. In some texts it is also like this, but regardless, in reality, whether true or false, or what we call conditioned and unconditioned phenomena, none of them are truly real. Just as in the Song of Enlightenment, the true is not established, the false is originally empty. Existence and non-existence are both discarded. What is not empty is also empty. This explanation is exactly the same. Next it says, though we use words to try to speak the truth, all words are false, not only words that aim at truth, but false words all are false. Both that which is called true and that which is called false are false. How can there be, therefore, observer and what is observed? Why did? Here it means, if this falsehood appears as true, then this falsehood actually the truth. These two are identically false, identically illusory, neither one is truly real. That is to say, the appearance of truth is false, and the falsehood, its appearance is illusory. In their essence, there is no difference between the illusory and the true. We currently consider a rainbow to be illusory, but its actual myriad colors do exist. However, when we further examine these myriad colors, it is the same, exactly the same. Both that which is called true and that which is called false are false. Here, both that which is called true, this false, negates both. They are neither true nor are they untrue. In their essence, they are free from both true and untrue. So how could there be an observer and what is observed? Regarding sense objects and faculties, the object is what is observed and the faculty is the observer. If this is the case, how can the observer and what is observed be established? They cannot be established, because of the principle discussed earlier, which is also being analyzed here. In the perceiver and perceived, there's nothing that is real. They are like vines that only stand by twisting round each other. Entanglement and liberation share a common basis. The path of sages and of common folk is one path only. This explains that if, as we discussed earlier, whether true or false, real or illusory, if none of these exist, then in between them there is no true nature. Without a true nature, just as we explained before, they are merely mutually dependent and mutually reliant. They are just like the reeds mentioned earlier. If that is the case, then this entanglement and liberation share the exact same cause. And there are no two separate paths for ordinary folk and sages. In essence, it is simply a matter of whether one is realized or unrealized. Any phenomenon that exists dependently is in fact also unestablished. In Master Yue Nying's commentary, he quotes a teaching from Bodhisattva Nagarjuna, but this is slightly different from what is in the fundamental wisdom of the Middle Way. How is it stated in the fundamental wisdom of the Middle Way? If a dharma is established dependently, that dharma is still dependent. If any phenomenon exists dependently by relying on causes, then this phenomenon is still dependently established. If it is dependently established, then it certainly will not truly exist. It will not have true existence, because, just like the intertwining reeds earlier, intertwining reeds will never possess their own independent nature. Therefore both the real and the unreal are ultimately unestablished in their essence. Hence the Avatamsaka Sutra also says, whether real or unreal, whether false or not false, worldly or transcendent, all are merely nominal designations. Actually, these scriptural quotes explain it very well. Regardless of whether it is truly existent or not truly existent, illusory or not illusory, worldly or transcendent, all of these are merely false words. They are spoken through our conceptually imputed language. In reality, none of these can express its true fundamental nature. In that case, we can say, regarding the so-called entanglement and liberation, didn't we say earlier, the root of both ignorance and liberation is the six faculties. The six faculties are mutually dependent, just like intertwining reeds. Apart from this, sages and ordinary folk do not have two separate paths. Actually, ordinary folk grasp at the six faculties. They grasp at the objects of the six faculties. Sages, on the other hand, do not grasp at them. Apart from this, there is no difference whatsoever. This should be the meaning. You should consider now these vines that twist around each other. The vines have no existence, yet they do not lack existence. The darkness of confusion is our basic ignorance. The light of understanding brings about our liberation. At that time it was said, you should examine this kind of relativity mentioned earlier, this nature of mutual dependence. In this way both emptiness and existence are absent. Emptiness does not exist, and existence does not exist either. Do both emptiness and existence exist together? That is not the case either. The meaning is what we often refer to as the Dharma, free from the four extremes. Because the darkness of confusion is our basic ignorance, we don't understand this and become confused. After becoming confused, it turns into ignorance. Whenever we awaken, this is the light of understanding brings about our liberation. Light of understanding in Tibetan means whenever one suddenly awakens, because when you are confused you are in ignorance. When we do not understand the principle of the faculties, objects and sense fields, we are confused and drown in samsara. When the principle of the faculties, objects and sense fields becomes perfectly clear, pure, and we have awakened, just like waking up from a dream, in this way one is already liberated. Therefore some commentaries say, what is so difficult about this? What is there to be difficult about? It is so simple. But we might indeed also harbor grasping in our minds, and so we remain in ignorance. If the mind has no grasping, this leads to attaining liberation. But Ananda also felt this issue was a bit difficult, needless to say for us. However, Ananda's appearance here was excellent because he continually asked questions, and the Buddha imparted many pith instructions to us. So up to this point, the section of restating verses we just covered has been completed. Later the Buddha speaks of other topics in a few verses. We will introduce this to everyone in the next class.
Bandara Badma Sadar